Chapter 1. The Invitation to Thornfield Manor. The rain fell in relentless sheets over London, drumming against the windows of Hercule Poirot's impeccably tidy flat at Whitehaven Mansions. The little Belgian detective sat in his armchair, a cup of tisane steaming on the table beside him, his eyes fixed on the flickering flames in the hearth. The symmetry of the room, polished mahogany, neatly arranged books, and a single vase of white roses reflected the order of his mind. Yet, this evening, his orderly world was disturbed by the arrival of an unexpected letter. "Mon ami," Poirot murmured to himself, adjusting his pince-nez as he slit open the envelope with a silver letter opener. It is not often that the post brings such intrigue. The letter was written in a hurried, elegant hand on cream stationery embossed with the crest of Thornfield Manor, a country estate in the misty hills of Devon. Poirot's moustache twitched as he read, "Dear Monsieur Poirot, your reputation as a man of unparalleled deductive skill precedes you. I find myself in urgent need of your assistance at Thornfield Manor, a matter of great delicacy, which I dare not commit fully to paper, threatens the peace of my household. I implore you to join us tomorrow evening for dinner, where all may be explained. Discretion is paramount. A car will collect you at 3 o'clock. I trust you will not refuse. Yours sincerely, Lady Margaret Haverford." Poirot folded the letter, his fingers tapping thoughtfully against the armrest. "Une affaire délicate," he mused. "And yet Lady Haverford does not specify. This vagueness, it is deliberate. Non, the little grey cells, they are already intrigued." The following afternoon, as the clock struck 3, a sleek Rolls-Royce purred to a stop outside Whitehaven Mansions. Poirot, resplendent in a tailored overcoat and gleaming patent leather shoes, stepped into the drizzle, his umbrella held aloft like a shield. The driver, a taciturn man with a scar across his cheek, offered no conversation, and Poirot settled into the plush leather seat, his mind turning over the possibilities. Thornfield Manor was unknown to him, but the name Haverford stirred a faint memory, an old scandal perhaps, whispered in the salons of London. The journey to Devon was long, the road winding through fog-shrouded moors. As dusk fell, the car turned onto a gravel drive lined with ancient yews, their gnarled branches casting eerie shadows. Thornfield Manor loomed ahead, a sprawling Gothic pile of weathered stone, its windows glowing like watchful eyes against the darkening sky. Poirot noted the ivy clinging to the walls, the air of faded grandeur, and the faint scent of damp earth. A butler, stiff as a tin soldier, greeted him at the door. "Monsieur Poirot, Lady Haverford awaits you in the drawing-room." "Merci," Poirot replied, handing over his hat and cane. He adjusted his tie, ensuring not a thread was out of place, and followed the butler through a labyrinth of oak-panelled corridors. Portraits of stern-faced Haverfords glared down, their eyes seeming to follow his every step. The drawing-room was a study in opulence, crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, and a roaring fire that did little to dispel the chill. Lady Margaret Haverford, a tall woman in her late 50s with silver hair and a commanding presence, rose to greet him. Her emerald gown shimmered, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Monsieur Poirot, you honor us," she said, extending a gloved hand. "I trust your journey was tolerable?" "Most tolerable, madame," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. "But it is the purpose of my visit that occupies my thoughts. Your letter, it speaks of delicacy, yet reveals little. Alas, I am here. What is this matter that troubles you?" Lady Margaret's lips tightened. She glanced toward the door, as if expecting an eavesdropper, then lowered her voice. "It is a matter of suspicion, Monsieur Poirot. My family, my household, is not what it seems. There are tensions, secrets, and I fear—" She hesitated, her fingers twisting a pearl necklace. "I fear something dreadful is about to happen." "Dreadful?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "You must be precise, madame. The little grey cells, they require details to function." Before she could respond, the door swung open, and a young man in a tweed suit strode in, his face flushed with agitation. "Mother, must we entertain this foreigner? Surely our troubles can be handled privately." Lady Margaret Sit's expression hardened. "Nigel, mind your manners. Monsieur Poirot is our guest, and his expertise is unrivaled." Nigel Haverford, whom Poirot judged to be in his late 20s, shot him a disdainful glance. "Expertise in meddling, perhaps," he muttered, pouring himself a brandy from a decanter. Poirot smiled thinly, his moustache quivering. "Monsieur, the meddling of Hercule Poirot is never without purpose. But come, let us not quarrel. Madame, you will introduce me to the household at dinner, n'est-ce pas? I shall observe, and perhaps the little grey cells will begin to unravel this enigma." Lady Margaret nodded, though her eyes remained troubled. "Dinner is at 8. You will meet them all. My daughter Clara, her fiancé Dr. Philip Grayson, my brother-in-law Colonel Rupert Haverford, and our guest Miss Evelyn Ward, an acquaintance of the family." As Poirot was shown to his room to freshen up, he paused at a window overlooking the manor's gardens. In the fading light, he glimpsed a figure, a woman in a dark cloak, moving swiftly toward the stables. She glanced back, her face obscured, and vanished into the mist. "Interessant," Poirot murmured, stroking his moustache. "The game. It begins. One chapter done, and the mystery has only just begun. Tell me, dear listener, where in the world are you joining us from? Leave your city below, and subscribe now, because the next chapter may hold the first real clue." Chapter 2. The Household of Secrets. The dining room of Thornfield Manor was a cavernous chamber, its long mahogany table gleaming under the light of a chandelier that flickered with the draught. Heavy damask curtains framed tall windows, beyond which the Devon night pressed like a velvet shroud. Hercule Poirot, seated at Lady Margaret Haverford's right, surveyed the assembled company with the precision of a watchmaker, examining cogs. Each face, he knew, held a piece of the puzzle hinted at in Lady Margaret's letter. To his left sat Clara Haverford, Lady Margaret's daughter, a pale young woman of 25, with auburn hair and eyes that darted nervously. Her delicate hands toyed with a silver fork, betraying a restlessness that intrigued Poirot. Beside her was Dr. Philip Grayson, her fiancé, a lean man with sharp features and a clinical air, his spectacles catching the candlelight as he spoke in measured tones about medical advancements. Across the table, Colonel Rupert Haverford, Lady Margaret's brother-in-law, glowered over his claret, his weathered face marked by years of military campaigns and perhaps private resentments. Nigel Haverford, whom Poirot had met earlier, lounged at the table's far end, his tie askew, a sullen smirk playing on his lips. Finally, there was Miss Evelyn Ward, the family's enigmatic guest, a striking woman in her 30s, with raven hair and a cool, appraising gaze that met Poirot's without flinching. "Mon Dieu," Poirot thought, adjusting his cufflinks, "what a tableau of secrets this is. Each one wears a mask, but the little grey cells they shall see through. Lady Margaret, presiding over the table, raised a glass to our guest Monsieur Poirot, whose presence honours us, she said, her voice steady, but her smile strained. May his wisdom bring clarity to troubled waters. The company murmured assent, though Nigel Sett's glass remained untouched. Clarity, he scoffed under his breath. What we need is less interference. Clara's fork clattered against her plate. Nigel, must you always be so disagreeable? Her voice was soft but sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. Enough, both of you, Lady Margaret interjected, her tone brooking no argument. Monsieur Poirot, you must forgive my children. These are trying times. Poirot inclined his head, his eyes twinkling. Madame, the family. It is like a symphony. Each instrument plays its part, yet harmony is not always assured. I am here to listen, to discern the melody beneath the discord. Dr. Grayson cleared his throat, pushing his spectacles up his nose. If I may, Monsieur Poirot, I find your metaphors charming, but what exactly brings you here? Lady Margaret has been rather vague. Précisément, Poirot replied, sipping his wine. The vagueness? It is intentional, n'est-ce pas? But let us say, I am here to observe, to understand the undercurrents of Thornfield Manor. Colonel Rupert snorted, his moustache bristling. Undercurrents. Poppycock. This family's troubles are no business of an outsider, no matter how famous his moustache. He shot Poirot a challenging glance, but the detective merely smiled. Monsieur le Colonel, the moustache? It is but a flourish. The true work happens here. Poirot tapped his temple where the little grey cells labour tirelessly. Miss Evelyn Ward, who had been silent thus far, leaned forward, her voice low and deliberate. And what do your little grey cells make of us, Monsieur Poirot? A house of strangers, perhaps, bound by obligation rather than affection. Poirot's gaze met hers, and he noted the faint challenge in her eyes. Mademoiselle, I see a household rich in character, each with a story to tell. But stories, they often hide truths. None. I am most curious about yours. Evelyn Sett's lips curved in a faint, unreadable smile. You still find my story dull. I am afraid. I merely a guest, here at Lady Margaret Sett's kindness. Kindness. Nigel barked a laugh, draining his glass. More like charity, Evelyn. Or is it something else entirely? Nigel. Lady Margaret's voice cracked like a whip, and the room fell silent. The butler entered, bearing a silver tureen of soup, and the moment passed, but Poirot's mind catalogued every glance, every word. The tension was palpable, like a storm gathering on the horizon. As dinner progressed, Poirot steered the conversation to lighter matters, the weather, the history of the manor, but his eyes missed nothing. Clara's nervous glances toward Dr. Grayson, the doctor's subtle frowns, the colonel's restless fingers drumming on the table, Nigel's barely concealed contempt, and Evelyn's detached composure all painted a picture of a household teetering on the edge of chaos. After dessert, as the company retired to the drawing-room, Poirot lingered by the dining-room's fireplace, examining a portrait of the late Lord Haverford, Lady Margaret's husband. The man's stern features and piercing eyes seemed to watch him, as if guarding a secret. Poirot's fingers brushed the frame, and he noticed a faint scratch, as if it had been recently moved. "Interessant," he murmured. "The walls of Thornfield Manor, they whisper, do they not?" A sudden scream shattered the silence, echoing from the upper floors. Poirot's head snapped up, his heart quickening. The game, it seemed, had taken a darker turn. Chapter 3. The Body in the Bathtub. The scream still echoed in Hercule Poirot's ears as he hurried up the grand staircase of Thornfield Manor, his polished shoes clicking against the polished oak. The household followed in a chaotic flurry, Lady Margaret's face pale, Clara clutching Dr. Grayson's arm, Nigel swearing under his breath, and Colonel Rupert barking orders to the butler. Only Miss Evelyn Ward moved with measured calm, her dark eyes scanning the others as if reading a script. The sound had come from the second floor, and the butler, trembling, led them to a heavy door at the end of a dimly lit corridor. It's the guest bathroom, sir," he stammered, addressing Poirot. "I heard the maid scream and came running." Poirot raised a hand for silence, his moustache twitching as he assessed the door. It was solid oak, unyielding, with a brass key protruding from the lock. "Allah, let us see what has caused such alarm," he said. Turning the key with a click, the door swung open, revealing a scene that froze the breath in his lungs. The bathroom was a relic of Victorian grandeur, marble tiles, a claw-footed bathtub of gleaming copper, and a single high window letting in slivers of moonlight. In the bathtub lay Colonel Rupert Haverford, fully clothed, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Water lapped gently at his chest, tinged pink with blood. A silver candlestick lay on the floor, its base stained red, and a faint smell of lavender soap hung in the air. Clara gasped, burying her face in Dr. Grayson's sixth shoulder. Lady Margaret swayed, clutching the doorframe. "Rupert," she whispered. "Oh, God, no." Poirot stepped forward, his eyes darting over the scene. "Personne ne touche à rien," he commanded sharply. "Do not touch anything. S'il vous plaît." The scene, it must remain undisturbed for the little grey cells to work. Nigel pushed past, his face flushed. "He sets dead, isn't it he? Bludgeoned in a bloody bathtub. What kind of madness is this?" "Madness, monsieur?" Poirot's voice was calm, almost musical, or perhaps method. "We shall see." He knelt beside the tub, careful not to disturb the candlestick. The colonel's head bore a single brutal wound at the temple, but the water showed no signs of a struggle, no splashes, no ripples beyond the gentle sway. Poirot's fingers hovered over the body, noting the rigidity of the limbs. "Interessant. The death, it is recent, within the hour, perhaps." "Sir." Dr. Grayson, recovering his composure, stepped forward. "As a physician, I can confirm that, Monsieur Poirot. The wound suggests a heavy blow, likely fatal. But why in the bathtub, and with a candlestick?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Pourquoi, indeed? The choice of weapon, the setting, it speaks of opportunity, or perhaps intention." He glanced at the window, locked tight, and the door, which the butler swore had been locked until he turned the key. A locked room, a body, and a household full of secrets. Mon Dieu, the puzzle. It begins to take shape. Lady Margaret Sitt's voice trembled. But who could have done this? Rupert was difficult. Yes, but to kill him? Difficult. Evelyn Wardsitt's tone was dry, almost mocking. He was a tyrant, Margaret. And you know it. Half the house despised him. "Enough," Nigel snapped. His fists clenched. "You are not family, Evelyn. Keep your opinions to yourself." Poirot raised an eyebrow, filing away the exchange. "Mesdames et messieurs, I shall require statements from each of you. Where were you in the hour before the scream? The truth, it is the only path to clarity." As the group began to murmur their alibis, Clara in her room, Dr. Grayson in the library, Nigel in the billiard room, Evelyn in the conservatory, and Lady Margaret in her study, Poirot's gaze returned to the bathtub. A single detail caught his eye. A faint smear of wax on the tub's rim, as if the candlestick had been placed there before it fell. "Curieux," he murmured. "The bathtub. It holds more than water, I think." He straightened, addressing the group. "We shall reconvene in the drawing-room. The police, they must be called, but Hercule Poirot, he will uncover the truth before they muddy the waters." As they filed out, Poirot lingered, his eyes sweeping the room once more. The lavender scent, the locked door, the wax smear, they were threads in a tapestry, and he would weave them together. But for now, the enigma of the bathtub deepened, and the little grey cells hummed with anticipation. Chapter 4: The Locked Room Puzzle. The guest bathroom of Thornfield Manor, with its cold marble tiles and the gleaming copper bathtub at its centre, seemed to hold its breath as Hercule Poirot stood motionless, his eyes sweeping the scene with the precision of a hawk. The body of Colonel Rupert Haverford remained in the tub, the water now still, its faint pink hue a grim reminder of the violence that had occurred. The silver candlestick, its base crusted with blood, lay on the floor, a silent witness to the crime. The air was heavy, with the scent of lavender soap mingling with the metallic tang of blood, and the single high window admitted only slivers of moonlight, casting long shadows across the room. Poirot, his hands clasped behind his back, circled the bathtub slowly, his polished shoes making no sound on the tiles. The household had been ushered to the drawing-room to await the local constable, but Poirot had insisted on remaining alone with the scene. "Les détails, they are the key," he murmured, his moustache quivering slightly. "In the locked room, the truth, it hides in plain sight." The door, as the butler had confirmed, had been locked from the inside when the maid's scream first alerted the household. The brass key, still in the lock, bore no signs of tampering, and the heavy oak door showed no marks of forced entry. The window, high and narrow, was secured with a rusty latch, its glass intact. Poirot's gaze lingered on the window, his mind calculating. Impossible, one might say, for an intruder to enter or leave, and yet, the Colonel, he is dead. Poor Cor. He knelt beside the bathtub, his eyes tracing the rim where he had previously noted the faint smear of wax. It was not the melted residue of a candle, but a deliberate mark, as if the candlestick had been rested there before being used as a weapon. He leaned closer, his pince-nez catching the dim light, and noticed a tiny chip in the copper rim, barely visible. "Curieux," he whispered. "The candlestick, it was placed with care, then struck with force. This suggests premeditation, non-rising." Poirot turned his attention to the Colonel's body. The man's military jacket was sodden, clinging to his broad frame, and his hands rested limply at his sides, showing no signs of a struggle. The wound at his temple was clean, a single blow delivered with precision. Poirot's fingers hovered over the water, noting its temperature, cool, but not cold. The death, it was within the hour, as Dr. Grayson confirmed. But the water, it remains warm. This bathtub, it is no ordinary stage for murder. He stepped back, his gaze sweeping the room once more. The marble sink held a bar of lavender soap, its edges worn unevenly, as if scraped against something rough. A towel, neatly folded, lay on a stool, untouched. The floor, though damp near the tub, showed no footprints other than those of the household who had crowded the doorway moments ago. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he noticed a single droplet of water on the windowsill, glinting in the moonlight. Iridescent, a drop where none should be. The window, it was opened perhaps. He approached the window, standing on tiptoe to inspect the latch. The rust was undisturbed, but a faint scratch on the sill suggested recent movement. Mon Dieu, the locked room. It is not so locked as it seems, he mused. But how, and by whom? The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts, and Poirot turned to see Dr. Philip Grayson at the door, his face pale behind his spectacles. "Monsieur Poirot, the constable will be here soon. I thought perhaps I could assist. As a doctor, I might offer further insights." Poirot's smile was polite but guarded. "Monsieur le Docteur, your offer, it is kind, but the little grey cells, they prefer to work unassisted at present. Tell me, however, where were you precisely when the scream was heard?" Grayson hesitated, adjusting his glasses. "In the library. As I said, I was reviewing some medical journals. Clara was with me for a time, but she left to change for dinner." "And you heard nothing unusual? No footsteps, no sounds from this corridor?" "None," Grayson replied firmly, though his fingers twitched at his side. "The library is at the far end of the house. I only came running when I heard the scream." Poirot nodded, his eyes never leaving Grayson's face. "Merci. You may return to the others. I shall join you shortly." As Grayson departed, Poirot turned back to the room, his mind racing. The locked door, the warm water, the wax smear, the droplet on the sill. These were pieces of a mosaic, and he sensed a pattern forming. But the motive, the why, remained elusive. Colonel Rupert had been a difficult man, as Evelyn Ward had so bluntly stated, but what grudge could drive someone to such a theatrical murder? He left the bathroom, locking the door behind him, and made his way to the drawing-room, where the household sat in uneasy silence. Lady Margaret stared into the fire, her hands clasped tightly. Clara sat beside Dr. Grayson, her eyes red from crying. Nigel paced, a cigarette burning between his fingers, while Evelyn Ward reclined in an armchair, her expression unreadable. The butler hovered near the door, his face ashen. "Mesdames, sir," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the tension. "The death of Colonel Rupert, it is no accident, it is murder. And the method, it is most peculiar. The room was locked, the window secure, yet someone entered and left, leaving behind a body and a candlestick. I ask you now, what did the Colonel mean to each of you?" Lady Margaret Sitt's voice was steady but strained. "He was my brother-in-law, a part of this family, though we often disagreed. He had strong opinions, but I cannot imagine who would wish him harm." Claire Bist's voice trembled. "Uncle Rupert was harsh, always criticizing. He didn't approve of Philip and me, but murder, it's unthinkable." Nigel snorted, flicking ash into the fire. "He was a bully, plain and simple, always lording his war stories over us, acting like he owned the place. Good riddance, I say." "Nigel," Lady Margaret snapped, her face flushing. Evelyn Ward, Stet's lips curled slightly. "Let's not pretend, Margaret. Rupert made enemies wherever he went. Perhaps someone simply had enough." Poirot Sitz's eyes gleamed as he observed the interplay. "Mademoiselle Ward, you speak with candour. Tell me, what was your connection to the Colonel? You are not family, yet you are here." Evelyn met his gaze unflinchingly. "I stuck an old friend of Margaret Sitt's Invited to stay for a few weeks, how Rupert and I crossed paths years ago. He wasn't sits fond of me, and the feeling was mutual. Interessant, Poirot said softly. And you, Monsieur Nigel, where did you go after dinner, before the scream? Nigel Sit's eyes narrowed. I told you I was in the billiard room, alone, playing a game to clear my head. What are you implying? Rien du tout. Poirot replied smoothly. I merely seek the truth, and the truth, it is like the water in that bathtub. It conceals as much as it reveals. As the constable's car crunched on the gravel outside, Poirot stepped back, his mind already piecing together the fragments. The locked room was a challenge, but Hercule Poirot thrived on such puzzles. The wax, the water, the scratch on the sill, they whispered of a clever mind at work. And somewhere in Thornfield Manor, that mind was watching, waiting for him to unravel the enigma. Chapter 5. Whispers of the Past. The drawing-room of Thornfield Manor was cloaked in a heavy silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of the wind across the Devon moors. The local constable, a ruddy-faced man named Inspector Hargreaves, had arrived, taken preliminary statements, and sealed the guest bathroom pending a full investigation. Yet Hercule Poirot, seated in a high-backed chair with his hands folded neatly, knew that the truth would not be found in official reports, but in the shadows of the human heart. His eyes, sharp as a falcon's, moved from one face to another, cataloguing every twitch, every glance. Lady Margaret Haverford sat rigidly, her hands clasped around a porcelain teacup, its contents untouched. Clara Haverford leaned against Dr. Philip Grayson, her auburn hair falling loose from its pins, her eyes swollen from tears. Nigel Haverford stood by the window, staring into the night, a cigarette smouldering between his fingers. Miss Evelyn Ward, ever composed, leafed through a novel, though Poirot noted her eyes rarely lingered on the page. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, and Poirot sensed that the key to Colonel Rupert's murder lay not just in the locked bathroom, but in the history of this fractured household. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice soft yet commanding. The death of Colonel Rupert, it is a tragedy, oui, but also a riddle. To solve it, we must look to the past. The Colonel, he was a man of strong character, n'est-ce pas? A man who made enemies, perhaps, but also left his mark. Tell me, what was he to each of you, beyond the words already spoken? Lady Margaret set her teacup down with a clink. Rupert was my husband Sit's brother, she said. Her voice measured. After Charles died, Rupert felt it his duty to oversee the family Sit's affairs. He was opinionated, yes, but loyal to the Haverford name. Loyal. Nigel turned from the window, his face twisted in a sneer. He was a meddler mother, always poking his nose where it wasn't I'd wanted. He treated this house like his personal barracks, barking orders and stirring trouble. Clara Stead's voice was barely a whisper. He frightened me sometimes. He Stead lectured me about my engagement to Philip, saying a doctor wasn't Stead good enough for a Haverford. He threatened to cut me out of the will. Dr. Grayson Sist's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his hand resting protectively on Clara Sist's. Poirot Sist's moustache twitched. Interessant. A will, you say? And who stands to benefit from the Colonel Sist's estate? Lady Margaret Sit's eyes flashed. That is hardly relevant, Monsieur Poirot. Rupert Sit's will is a private matter, and besides, he had no direct heirs. The estate would likely pass to Nigel and Clara as Charles Sit's children. And yet, Poirot said, tilting his head, The colonel, he was a man of means, a military pension, perhaps investments, such things, they inspire passions. Evelyn Ward closed her book with a soft thud. You sit fishing, Monsieur Poirot. If you want to know about Rupert Sit's enemies, look closer to home. He wasn't Sit just a tyrant here. He had a past, one he didn't Sit like to discuss. Poirot Sit's gaze settled on her, his eyes gleaming. Mademoiselle Ward, you speak of the past with such certainty. What do you know of the Colonel Sit's history? Evelyn hesitated, her fingers brushing the spine of her book. Only whispers, she said carefully. Rupert served in India decades ago during the Rajid. There were rumors, scandals, even about his conduct. Something about a dishonorable discharge that was hushed up. He never spoke of it, but it made him bitter. Lady Margaret Sit's face paled. That is ancient history, Evelyn, and unkind to bring up now. Is it? Evelyn replied, her tone cool. Rupert carried grudges like medals. Perhaps someone from his past carried one too. Poirot leaned forward, his voice like velvet. Précisément. The past, it is a shadow that follows us. Tell me, Madame Haverford, was there anything, a letter, a visitor, a conversation, that suggested the Colonel Sit's past had returned to haunt him? Lady Margaret Sit's hands trembled slightly, betraying her composure. There was a letter, a few weeks ago. It arrived without a return address, written in a strange hand. Rupert read it and burned it at once. He was agitated, more than usual, but he refused to discuss it. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, his fingers tapping his knee. A letter burned, a secret kept. And where is this letter now? The ashes, they may still speak. The butler, standing silently by the door, cleared his throat. If I may, sir, I cleared the fireplace in the Colonel's set study that day. There was nothing left but dust. Poirot nodded, undeterred. Mercy. But the absence of evidence, it is evidence itself. Monsieur Nigel, you were close to your uncle. None? Did he confide in you about this letter, or any enemies? Nigel flicked his cigarette into the fire, his eyes hard, close. Hardly. He thought me a wastrel, always harping on about duty and discipline. If he had enemies, he didn't share them with me. Probably some old soldier he crossed in India, come to settle a score. Clara Steck's voice broke the tension. What about the candlestick? It's Steck's from the dining room. Isn't it? I saw it there during dinner. How did it end up in the bathroom? Poirot Sit's eyes lit up. Excellent observation, Mademoiselle Clara. The candlestick, it is a clue most vital. It was not in the bathroom during dinner, yet it became the instrument of death. Someone carried it there, with purpose. Dr. Grayson frowned, his clinical mind engaged. But the locked door, Monsieur Poirot, how could anyone enter or leave? The key was inside, and the window is too high and rusted shut. Poirot smiled thinly. The locked room, it is a challenge to the little grey cells, but not insurmountable. The door, the window, the water, they all tell a story. I must reflect further. As the conversation lapsed, Poirot rose, excusing himself to inspect the Colonel's study. The room was a stark contrast to the Manor's opulence, a cluttered desk, shelves of military histories, and a faint smell of tobacco. Poirot's fingers brushed the fireplace, where a few flecks of ash remained. He sifted through them carefully, finding a tiny fragment of paper, its edge scorched, but bearing a single word in faded ink. Retribution. Retribution, Poirot whispered, slipping the fragment into his pocket. The past, it does not sleep, and in Thornfield Manor it has awakened. He returned to the drawing-room, where the household remained, their faces etched with fear and suspicion. The fragment of paper burned in his mind, a whisper of a secret that linked the Colonel's death to a history long buried. The little grey cells were at work, and Poirot knew that the next clue would bring him closer to the heart of the enigma. Chapter 6. The Alibi Game. The clock in the drawing-room of Thornfield Manor struck 11, its chimes reverberating through the tense silence like a judge's gavel. The fire had dwindled to glowing embers, casting flickering shadows across the faces of the household, each one a study in unease. Hercule Poirot stood before the hearth, his small, fastidious figure commanding the room, with an authority that belied his stature. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, moved from Lady Margaret Haverford's rigid composure to Nigel's restless pacing, from Clara's trembling hands to Dr. Grayson's guarded frown, and finally to Miss Evelyn Ward's enigmatic calm. Inspector Hargreaves, the local constable, had retired to the village to summon reinforcements, leaving Poirot to unravel the threads of the murder in his own inimitable way. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice smooth as polished marble, the death of Colonel Rupert Haverford. It is a crime most deliberate. The locked room, the candlestick, the warm water, these are not accidents but choices, and choices, they are made by people. People with motives, with secrets. I ask you now to account for your movements in the hour before the maid's scream. The truth, it is your only defence. Lady Margaret straightened, her emerald gown catching the firelight. Monsieur Poirot, I was in my study, writing letters. I heard nothing until the scream. The butler can confirm I was there. Poirot inclined his head, his moustache twitching slightly. Merci, madame. And yet, the study, it is not far from the guest bathroom. None. A scream. It travels. Did you hear no footsteps? No sound of water? Perhaps. Her lips tightened. None. The walls of this house are thick, and my mind was occupied. Poirot. Stee's gaze shifted to Clara, who sat clutching Dr. Grayson Sest's hand. Mademoiselle Clara, you said you were in your room, changing for dinner, alone. Oui. Clara nodded, her auburn hair falling across her pale face. Yes, I went upstairs. After leaving Philip in the library, I was alone until I heard the scream and ran to the corridor. Dr. Grayson adjusted his spectacles, his voice steady but clipped. As I told you, Monsieur Poirot, I was in the library, reading. Clara was with me until about 7:30, then she left. I remained until the scream. Précisément, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. The library. It is at the far end of the house, yet you reached the bathroom quickly. Monsieur le Docteur, you are a man of prompt action, it seems. Grayson Sest's jaw tightened. I heard the scream and ran, like anyone would. I sit my doctor. It sits my instinct to respond to distress. Poirot turned to Nigel, who leaned against the mantel, lighting another cigarette. Monsieur Nigel, you claim you were in the billiard room, alone playing a game to tease clear your head. This a curious choice, none when the household dines together. Nigel exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes defiant. I wasn't set in the mood for Mother Sect's formalities. I was knocking balls around, minding my own business. Nobody can prove otherwise. Vraiment? Poirot's tone was mild, but his gaze was piercing. And yet the billiard room, it is near the staircase to the second floor. You heard nothing. No footsteps, no sound of a struggle. Nothing. Nigel snapped. I was focused on my game. This house is a maze. Sounds don't carry as you think. Poirot's attention settled on Evelyn Ward, who met his gaze with a faint, almost amused smile. Mademoiselle Ward, you were in the conservatory, you said. A place of flowers and glass, far from the bathroom. What occupied you there? Evelyn Steck's fingers traced the arm of her chair. I was sketching the orchids. The conservatory is quiet. A place to think. I heard the scream and came at once. Sketching. Poirot repeated, his voice thoughtful. And yet your hands, they bear no trace of charcoal or ink. The artist, she is meticulous. None. Evelyn Sect's smile. Didn't Sect waver? I use pencils, Monsieur Poirot, and I wash my hands. You stepped observant, but not every detail is a clue. Au contraire, Poirot replied, his eyes twinkling. Every detail, it is a clue to Hercule Poirot. Now, let us consider the candlestick. It was in the dining room during dinner, yet it found its way to the bathroom. Someone carried it there. Someone unlocked the door, struck the colonel, and locked it again. Who among you had the opportunity? The room erupted in protests. Nigel flung his cigarette into the fire. This is absurd. You sitter accusing us all. Clara Det's voice trembled. How could any of us do such a thing? Uncle Rupert was family. Lady Margaret Sit's tone was sharp. Monsieur Poirot, these insinuations are intolerable. My household is not a den of murderers. Dr. Grayson cleared his throat, his clinical demeanor strained. The logistics alone make it implausible. The door was locked from the inside, and the window is inaccessible. Surely you see the impossibility? Evelyn Ward leaned forward, her voice low and deliberate. Unless, of course, it wasn't Stet. Impossible. Rupert wasn't Stet killed where he was found, was he? Perhaps the body was moved. Poirot's eyes gleamed at her suggestion, though he gave no sign of agreement. Mademoiselle, you have a mind for puzzles, but let us not speculate beyond the facts. The alibis, they are incomplete. Monsieur Nigel, you say you were alone, yet the maid, she passed the billiard room at 7:45 and saw no light within. Mademoiselle Clara, your room is adjacent to the bathroom, yet you claim to have heard nothing until the scream. Monsieur le Docteur, your journals in the library were neatly stacked, unopened, when I inspected them. And Mademoiselle Ward, the conservatory door was ajar, suggesting a hasty exit. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling like fog. Nigel Scepter's face reddened. Are you calling me a liar? I was there, I tell you. Cligaraste's hands twisted in her lap. I was in my room. I swear it. I might have been reading, not changing. Grayson Teast's voice was tight. My journals were organized because I am methodical. Monsieur Poirot, you set reading too much into trifles. Evelyn merely raised an eyebrow. The conservatory door. It sticks. Always has. You stir building a case on air. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the clamor. Calmez-vous. The little grey cells, they do not accuse without reason, but the alibis, they do not align. Let us consider another detail. The candlestick. It was polished, yet bore no fingerprints, save those of the butler, who handled it during dinner. The murderer, he was careful, Gloves, perhaps, or a cloth. This suggests planning, not passion. Lady Margaret Sitt's voice was icy. You go too far, Monsieur Poirot. My brother-in-law was killed, and you interrogate us like criminals. What of the letter you found? That word, retribution. Surely it points to an outsider, someone from Rupert Sitt's past. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. The letter. We. It is a thread I follow. But the candlestick, the locked room, these are the work of someone familiar with this house, someone who knew the Colonel's habits, his movements. Tell me, madam, did the Colonel have a routine, perhaps a nightly bath? Lady Margaret hesitated. Yes, he often bathed before retiring. He found it calming, a habit from his military days. Interessant, Poirot murmured. And who knew of this routine? All of you, I presume? The question hung unanswered. The silence heavy. Poirot's gaze lingered on each face, noting Nigel's clenched fists, Clara's averted eyes, Grayson's stiff posture, and Evelyn's faint smirk. He turned to the butler, who stood nervously by the door. Monsieur, the bathroom. Was it prepared for the Colonel's bath this evening? The butler nodded. Yes, sir. I filled the tub at 7:30, as he requested. Hot water. Lavender soap. He was particular about it. Hot water. Lavender soap. He was particular about it. And the candlestick. Poirot pressed. When did you last see it in the dining room? During dinner, sir. I cleared it away with the other silver at 8, placed it on the sideboard. I swear it was there when I left. Poirot's fingers tapped his chin. Alors the candlestick moves between 8 and the scream at 8:15. A narrow window, but sufficient for a clever mind. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. One of you, or perhaps an unseen hand, took that candlestick, struck the Colonel, and arranged the scene to baffle. But Hercule Poirot, he is not baffled. The alibis, they crumble like dry leaves. As the household bristled, Poirot stepped toward the door. I shall retire to reflect, but know this, the truth, it is like the water in that bathtub, clear to those who look closely. Tomorrow we shall speak again. He left the room, the fragment of paper, with the word retribution burning in his pocket. The alibis were a game, and someone was playing to win. But Poirot's little grey cells were already tracing the moves, and the board was far from set. Chapter 7. The Missing Heirloom. The morning sun struggled through the heavy clouds over Thornfield Manor, casting a pallid light across the dining room where Hercule Poirot sat, sipping his café au lait with the precision of a man performing a ritual. The household had gathered for breakfast, but the air was thick with unease, the clink of cutlery and murmur of voices overshadowed by the spectre of Colonel Rupert Haverford's murder. Poirot's eyes, ever vigilant, noted the strained faces, Lady Margaret's forced composure, Clara's nervous glances, Dr. Grayson's guarded silence, Nigel's sullen demeanour, and Miss Evelyn Ward's cool detachment. The little grey cells were at work, piecing together the mosaic of the previous night's alibis, the locked room, and the cryptic word retribution. But a new disturbance was about to ripple the surface of the investigation. As the butler served poached eggs, Lady Margaret rose abruptly, her face ashen. Monsieur Poirot, I must speak with you at once. Something terrible has happened. Poirot set down his cup, his moustache twitching with interest. Madame, terrible is a word much used in this house. What is this new calamity? She hesitated, glancing at the others, then lowered her voice. The Haverford sapphire is missing. It was kept in a locked case in the library. and this morning I found the case empty." A collective gasp rose from the table. Claricipsa's hand flew to her mouth. The sapphire. "Mother, that sip's been in the family for generations." Nigel slammed his fist on the table, rattling the china. "First Uncle Rupert, now the sapphire. This is no coincidence. Someone sits looting the house while we sit distracted. Someone sitters looting the house while we sit distracted." Dr. Grayson frowned, his clinical tone cutting through the uproar. "When was the sapphire last seen, and who had access to the library?" Evelyn Ward leaned back, her dark eyes gleaming with curiosity. "A thief and a murderer under one roof. How very theatrical." Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm but commanding. "Calmez-vous, s'il vous plaît. Madame Haverford, describe this sapphire and tell me of its significance." Lady Margaret's hands trembled as she spoke. "It's a star sapphire, a deep blue gem the size of a quail's egg, set in a gold pendant. It belonged to my husband's great-grandmother, passed down through the Haverford line. It's worth a fortune, but its sentimental value is greater. It was locked in a rosewood case, with a combination known only to Rupert and me." "Interessant," Poirot murmured, his fingers tapping the table. "And when did you last see it?" "Yesterday afternoon," she replied. "I checked the case before dinner, as I often do. It was there, secure. This morning the case was empty, the lock unbroken." Poirot Steck's eyes gleamed. "Unbroken, you say? A lock that yields without force suggests a knowledge most intimate. I must see this case at once." The household followed Poirot to the library, a vast room lined with leather-bound volumes and heavy oak furniture. The rosewood case sat on a side table, its intricate carvings gleaming in the morning light. Poirot examined it closely, noting the absence of scratches or pry marks. The combination dial was pristine, its numbers aligned at 0. Mon Dieu, a thief who knows the code, or a lock that betrays no struggle. This is no ordinary theft. He turned to the group, his gaze piercing. "The sapphire. It disappears on the night of a murder. The candlestick moves from this very library to the bathroom. The threads, they intertwine. Who was in the library yesterday evening, besides Monsieur le Docteur?" Grayson stiffened. "I was reading. As I said, I didn't touch the case." Claristet's voice was hesitant. I was there briefly, with Philip, before I went upstairs. I didn't go near the case." Nigel snorted. "Convenient, Clara, hiding behind your fiancé, as usual." "Enough, Nigel," Lady Margaret snapped. "Monsieur Poirot, the library is open to the household. Any of us could have entered." Evelyn Sett's lips curved in a faint smile. "Or none of us. Perhaps your thief is an outsider, Margaret, slipping through the chaos of last night." Poirot Sitz's eyes narrowed. "Mademoiselle Ward, you are quick to suggest outsiders, yet the sapphire, like the murder, requires knowledge of this house. Tell me, did you visit the library yesterday?" Evelyn met his gaze unflinchingly. "No, I told you. I was in the conservatory, sketching." "Oui, the sketching," Poirot said, his tone thoughtful. "And yet no sketches have I seen. Perhaps you will share them with Hercule Poirot." Her smile tightened. "They sit private, monsieur. But I assure you, I have no interest in jewels." Poirot turned back to the case, his fingers brushing the dial. "The sapphire. It is not merely a gem. Non, it is a symbol of legacy, of power. Its theft. It is tied to the Colonel's death, I think. But how?" He paused, his mind racing. The word retribution from the burned letter echoed in his thoughts, and now this heirloom, stolen without a trace. The puzzle grew more complex, yet the little grey cells thrived on such challenges. He addressed the butler, who stood nervously by the door. "Monsieur, the library, was it locked last night?" "No, sir," the butler replied. "It's sets rarely locked, as the family uses it freely. I passed by at 8, after clearing the dining room, and saw no one." "And the candlestick?" Poirot pressed. "You placed it on the sideboard, yet it travelled to the bathroom. Did you notice anything unusual in the library?" The butler hesitated. "There was a book on the floor, near the case. I picked it up and returned it to the shelf. I thought nothing of it at the time." Poirot's eyes lit up. "A book? Which one?" "Précisément. A history of the Haverford family, sir. Old, leather-bound, kept on the lower shelf." Poirot crossed to the shelf, scanning the titles until he found the volume, a dusty tome embossed with the Haverford crest. He opened it carefully, flipping through yellowed pages, until a loose sheet caught his eye. It was a photograph, faded but clear, showing a younger Colonel Rupert in military uniform, standing beside a woman with dark hair and a defiant expression. On the back, in a spidery hand, was written Calcutta, 1898, Ra H and L.W. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered, slipping the photograph into his pocket beside the fragment of retribution. "The past, it speaks louder now. Madame Haverford, who is this L.W.?" Lady Margaret Sit's face drained of colour. I don't sit know. Rupert never spoke of his time in India. Not in detail. That photograph, it must be from his regiment." Poirot nodded, but his mind was racing. The initials, the sapphire, the murder, they were links in a chain, forged in a history the Colonel had buried. He turned to the household, his voice firm. "The sapphire, it is not lost to us yet. It remains in this house, I believe, hidden by a hand that knows its value. And that hand, it is the same that struck the Colonel. Hercule Poirot. He will find it." As the group dispersed, muttering and casting wary glances, Poirot lingered in the library, his fingers tracing the rosewood case. The sapphire's theft was no mere opportunism. It was a message, a piece of the enigma. The little grey cells hummed, and the game, it grew ever more intricate. Chapter 8. Shadows in the Library. The library of Thornfield Manor was a sanctuary of secrets, its towering shelves laden with leather-bound tomes that whispered of the Haverford family's storied past. The late morning light filtered through tall mullioned windows, casting intricate patterns on the polished floor, but the air was heavy with the weight of murder and theft. Hercule Poirot stood alone in the room, his small, fastidious figure dwarfed by the grandeur around him. The rosewood case, now empty of the Haverford sapphire, sat on the side table, a mute witness to the latest twist in the enigma. In his pocket, the photograph of Colonel Rupert and the mysterious L.W. from Calcutta, 1898, burned alongside the scorched fragment bearing the word retribution. Poirot's little grey cells were ablaze, sensing that the library held more than books, it held answers. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his fingers brushing the spine of the Haverford family history where he had found the photograph. "The past, it is a shadow that lingers, and in this room it casts a long one." He moved methodically, his eyes scanning every detail, the neatly aligned books, the faint dust disturbed on the lower shelf, the sideboard where the candlestick had rested before its deadly journey to the bathroom. The butler's mention of a book on the floor intrigued him, suggesting a hasty search or a careless moment. Poirot returned to the shelf, pulling out volumes one by one, his gloved hands careful not to disturb potential clues. As he reached for a worn copy of Military Campaigns of the Raj, a thin envelope slipped from between its pages, fluttering to the floor. Quintus Quisitist, I roast. His mustache twitched as he retrieved the envelope. It was unsealed, addressed to Colonel R. Haverford, in a sharp, angular hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper, its message brief but chilling. You thought your sins buried, but they live. The sapphire is mine, by right. Pay £5,000 by the 30th, or the truth of Calcutta will be known. You know where to find me. The letter was unsigned, but a faint watermark, a crest of crossed swords, marked the paper. Poirot Sitst's eyes gleamed. Blackmail, he whispered. The Colonel, he was hunted by his past, and this letter, it is the claw that struck. He slipped the letter into his pocket, his mind racing. The sapphire's theft, the word retribution, the photograph of L.W. They were threads in a tapestry of betrayal. The library, it seemed, was the heart of the mystery, a place where secrets were both hidden and revealed. Poirot turned to the desk, a heavy mahogany piece cluttered with papers and a silver inkstand. He sifted through the documents, bills, invitations, a draft of the Colonel's will, until his fingers paused on a small leather-bound notebook tucked beneath a blotter. Opening it, he found pages filled with the Colonel's cramped handwriting, notes on investments, military anecdotes, and, curiously, a list of initials and dates. One entry stood out. L.W., Calcutta, 1898. Debt unpaid. Beside it was a more recent note, dated a week ago. E.W. returns. Demands sapphire. Must resolve. E.W., Poirot murmured, his heart quickening. Evelyn Ward, perhaps. The initials, they align, and her presence here, it is no coincidence. He closed the notebook, his mind cataloguing the implications. Evelyn had claimed to be a friend of Lady Margaret's, but her cryptic remarks and cool demeanour suggested a deeper connection to the Colonel's past. The sound of footsteps broke his reverie, and Poirot turned to see Lady Margaret entering the library, her face drawn with worry. "Monsieur Poirot, have you found anything? The sapphire. It sets more than a jewel. It sets the heart of this family." Poirot Sitst's smile was measured. "Madame, the heart of a family. It is not in stones, but in truths. Tell me, what do you know of a woman with the initials L.W. from the Colonel Sitst's time in India?" Lady Margaret Sitst's eyes widened, her hand clutching her pearl necklace. "L.W. I don't stet recall. Rupert rarely spoke of India. It was a painful time for him, a scandal, hushed up by the family. Why do you ask?" Poirot produced the photograph, holding it delicately. "This, madam. The Colonel and a woman, Calcutta, 1898. The initials L.W. are written here. Does she not resemble someone you know?" Lady Margaret studied the image, her breath catching. "It sits, it could be Evelyn, but younger. The eyes, the posture, but that sits impossible. Evelyn is a friend, a guest. She never mentioned knowing Rupert before." "Precisement," Poirot said, his voice soft but firm. "The impossible. It is often the truth in disguise. Madame, I must ask, how well do you know Mademoiselle Ward? Her history, her motives?" Lady Margaret hesitated, her fingers twisting the pearls. "She came to me 6 months ago, an acquaintance from London society. She said she needed a quiet place to recover from, personal troubles. I invited her to stay. She's been charming, if reserved. But Rupert, he was uneasy around her, now that I think of it. Poirot nodded, filing away her words. Merci, the library. It has given me much to ponder. The sapphire, the letter, the photograph. They are pieces of a puzzle, and I begin to see its shape. As Lady Margaret left, Poirot returned to the sideboard, his eyes lingering on the spot where the candlestick had stood. He noticed a faint scratch on the wood, as if something heavy had been dragged across it. Kneeling, he examined the floor beneath and found a tiny bead of blue glass, no larger than a pinhead, glinting in the dust. "Curieux," he murmured, pocketing the bead. "The sapphire. It leaves a trail, perhaps." He stepped to the window, looking out over the misty gardens. The library shadows seemed to shift, as if the walls themselves were watching. The letter's demand for £5,000. The initials E.W. in the Colonel's notebook. The blue bead. They pointed to a motive rooted in betrayal, perhaps revenge. But the locked room, the warm water, the candlestick, these were the work of a mind, both cunning and familiar with Thornfield Manor. As he prepared to rejoin the household, a faint creak came from the far corner of the library, where a bookcase stood slightly ajar. Poirot's hand tightened on his cane, his senses alert. "Qui est là?" he called softly, but no answer came. He approached the bookcase, noting a hidden catch that suggested a secret panel. Before he could investigate further, the door opened, and Nigel entered, his face flushed with agitation. "What are you doing? Poking about?" Nigel demanded. "Found your precious clues yet, or are you just wasting our time?" Poirot's smile was serene. "Monsieur Nigel, the little grey cells, they are never idle. But tell me, why do you come to the library now? To seek or to conceal?" Nigel's eyes narrowed. "I don't sit like your tone, Poirot. I came to find a book. That's all." "A book?" Poirot repeated, his tone deceptively mild. "Like the one that hid the letter, perhaps? Or the one that held the photograph of your uncle and L.W.? Nigel paled, but recovered quickly. "I don't start to know what you start and talking about. Leave me out of your games." As Nigel stormed out, Poirot's gaze returned to the bookcase. The library's shadows held more than books. They held the key to the enigma. The letter, the bead, the hidden panel, they were whispers of a truth that was drawing ever closer, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until it was revealed. Chapter 9. The Nighttime Intruder. The night draped Thornfield Manor in a shroud of silence, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl and the creak of ancient timbers settling in the cold. Hercule Poirot, unable to sleep, sat in his guest room, a single candle casting a warm glow over his notebook. The clues, the cryptic letter demanding £5,000, the photograph of Colonel Rupert with L.W. in Calcutta, the scorched fragment bearing retribution, the blue glass bead, and the missing Haverford sapphire danced in his mind like pieces of a shattered mosaic. The library's hidden panel, discovered just hours ago, hinted at secrets yet to be uncovered. Poirot's little grey cells hummed, sensing that the truth was close, yet veiled by the manor's shadows. A faint noise, like the scuff of a shoe on stone, jolted him from his reverie. He extinguished the candle. His senses sharpened and moved silently to the door. The corridor beyond was dark, the manor's gas lamps long since dimmed. Poirot, his cane in hand, stepped into the gloom, his eyes adjusting to the faint moonlight filtering through a window. The sound came again, a muffled thud from the direction of the ground floor. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered, his moustache twitching. "The night it brings the bold and the reckless. Let us see who prowls Thornfield Manor." He descended the grand staircase with the stealth of a cat, his polished shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. The air was chill, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and wax polish. As he reached the foyer, a shadow flickered across the wall, moving toward the library. Poirot's heart quickened. The library, where the sapphire's case stood empty, where the blackmail letter and photograph had been found, was clearly a magnet for secrets. He followed, keeping to the edges of the corridor, where the shadows offered cover. The library door was ajar, a sliver of moonlight illuminating the room beyond. Poirot peered through the gap, his breath steady despite the thrill of the chase. A figure, cloaked in dark fabric, moved swiftly toward the bookcase where he had found the hidden panel. The figure's hands, gloved, fumbled with the catch, and with a soft click, the panel swung open, revealing a narrow recess. Poirot stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Arrêtez-vous. Who is there?" disturbing the peace of Hercule Poirot's investigation. The figure froze, then bolted toward the window, wrenching it open with surprising strength. Before Poirot could close the distance, the intruder leapt into the night, vanishing into the mist-shrouded gardens. Poirot hurried to the window, but the figure was gone, swallowed by the darkness. He noted, however, a torn scrap of black fabric caught on the window's latch, its edge frayed but embroidered with a tiny silver thread. "Interessant," Poirot murmured, pocketing the fabric. He turned to the bookcase, his fingers tracing the hidden panel. The recess was shallow, containing only a small locked box, its surface engraved with the Haverford crest. He tested the lock, but it held firm. "A secret within a secret," he said softly. "The sapphire, perhaps? Or something more dangerous?" He closed the panel and returned to the library's center, his eyes scanning for further clues. The blue glass bead he had found earlier suggested a connection to the sapphire, but the intruder's presence raised new questions. Was this a thief seeking the gem, or a murderer covering their tracks? The embroidered fabric hinted at someone with means, not a common prowler. As he pondered, the library door creaked open, and Clara Haverford appeared, her nightgown hastily covered by a shawl, her face pale in the moonlight. "Monsieur Poirot, I heard a noise. What's happening?" Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone was firm. "Mademoiselle Clara, it is unwise to wander alone at such an hour. A figure cloaked and swift was here moments ago tampering with the bookcase. Did you see anyone in the corridor?" Clara shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, I couldn't sleep. I heard footsteps and thought it might be you or the butler. Was it the murderer?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, his voice measured. "Or perhaps a thief, drawn by the sapphire sceptre's allure. Tell me, mademoiselle, do you know of a locked box kept in this library?" Clara frowned, clutching her shawl. "A box? No. But Uncle Rupert was secretive. He spent hours in here, especially after that letter arrived. He mentioned a debt once, something from India, but he wouldn't explain." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A debt, you say? The word retribution, it follows the colonel like a shadow. Merci, mademoiselle. Return to your room and lock your door. The night, it is not safe." As Clara left, Poirot heard another sound, a soft cough from the corridor. He stepped out to find Dr. Grayson, his dressing gown askew, his spectacles glinting. "Monsieur Poirot, I saw Clara come downstairs. Is everything all right?" "Monsieur le Docteur," Poirot replied, his tone deceptively mild. "You are awake at a curious hour. Did you too hear footsteps?" Grayson nodded. "I was in my room, reading. I thought it might be the staff, but then I saw Clara. I came to check." Poirot studied him, noting the faint tremor in his hands. "Vraiment? The manor. It is alive tonight. Tell me, do you know of a woman named L.W. from the Colonel Sepp's past?" Grayson's face remained impassive, but his eyes flickered. "No, he never spoke of his time in India to me." "Why do you ask?" Poirot smiled thinly. "A photograph, a letter, initials, they weave a story, but enough for now. Return to your rest, monsieur." As Grayson retreated, Poirot returned to the library, his mind racing. The intruder, the locked box, the silver-threaded fabric, they were new pieces in the puzzle. He recalled Evelyn Ward's cryptic remarks about the Colonel's past and her initials E.W. in his notebook. Could she be connected to L.W.? And why had the intruder targeted the bookcase? The sapphire, the blackmail, the murder, they were linked, and the nighttime prowler was a key to unlocking their connection. He resolved to confront the household at breakfast, but first he needed to secure the library. As he closed the window, he noticed a faint smudge on the sill, a trace of mud, fresh and damp, unlike the dry earth of the gardens. "Caillou," he murmured. "The intruder, they come from within, perhaps not without." Poirot locked the library door, pocketing the key. The manor's shadows were closing in, but Hercule Poirot was not one to fear the dark. The little grey cells were alight, and the enigma it was beginning to unravel. Chapter 10. The chemistry of motive. The morning light filtered weakly through the heavy drapes of Thornfield Manor's dining room, where Hercule Poirot sat, his café au lait untouched, as he contemplated the enigma before him. The household was subdued, their faces etched with fatigue and suspicion after a sleepless night marked by the intruder's fleeting appearance in the library. The locked box, the scrap of silver-threaded fabric, the photograph of L.W., the blackmail letter, and the missing Haverford sapphire formed a constellation of clues in Poirot's mind. But a new question gnawed at him. The chemistry of the crime itself, the warm water in the bathtub, the lavender soap, the absence of fingerprints on the candlestick. These were not mere details, but a formula, and Poirot was determined to solve it. As the household gathered for breakfast, the air was taut with unspoken accusations. Lady Margaret's hands trembled as she poured tea. Clara avoided eye contact. Dr. Grayson adjusted his spectacles nervously. Igel glowered over his plate, and Evelyn Ward maintained her enigmatic composure, her dark eyes watching Poirot with faint amusement. Inspector Hargreaves had returned with a forensic assistant, a young man named Dr. Wells, who was examining the bathroom under Poirot's watchful eye. But Poirot knew the key to the mystery lay not only in the physical evidence, but in the motives that swirled like currents beneath the surface. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the clink of cutlery, "the murder of Colonel Rupert Haverford. It is a crime of precision, not passion. The locked room, the candlestick, the water, they speak of a mind that calculates. Today we shall explore the chemistry of this crime, for in the smallest details the truth reveals itself." Dr. Grayson frowned. His clinical mind engaged. Chemistry, Monsieur Poirot. Surely this is a matter of blunt force, not science. The candlestick caused the fatal wound. Dr. Wells confirmed it. Poirot's moustache twitched. Monsieur le Docteur, you are correct, but incomplete. The candlestick, it is the weapon. But the scene, it is staged. The water in the bathtub, it was warm, yet the colonel was fully clothed. The lavender soap, its edges scraped unevenly, and the candlestick, it bears no fingerprints. These are not accidents, but choices. I have asked Dr. Wells to analyze the water, and his findings, they are most interesting. Lady Margaret sits, teacup clattered against its saucer. The water? What could it possibly tell us? Poirot raised a hand, his eyes gleaming. Patience, madame. Dr. Wells, he informs me that the water contains a trace of an unusual substance, not blood, not soap, but a chemical compound, perhaps a sedative. The colonel, he did not struggle. Why? Because he was incapacitated before the blow was struck. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A sedative? You mean he was poisoned? Not poisoned, Mademoiselle Poirot corrected, but calmed perhaps to ensure compliance. The lavender soap? It is not merely for scent. Its surface, it is rough, as if used to conceal something. A tablet, perhaps, dissolved in the water. Nigel snorted, pushing his plate away. Oh, this is nonsense, Poirot. You sat spinning fairy tales. Uncle Rupert was bashed on the head, not drugged in some elaborate plot. Poirot's smile was serene but sharp. Monsieur Nigel, the fairy tale, it is yours, if you believe a man like the colonel would sit in a bathtub, fully clothed, and allow his head to be struck without resistance. No, the murderer. They planned with care. And the sedative, it suggests a knowledge of chemistry or medicine. All eyes turned to Dr. Grayson, whose face reddened. Are you implying I had a hand in this? I'm a physician. Yes, but I don't carry sedatives in my pocket. I was in the library, as I told you. Calmez-vous, Poirot said, his tone soothing yet probing. I imply nothing, monsieur. But your expertise, it is relevant. Tell me, do you have access to such compounds, chloral hydrate perhaps, or a barbiturate? Grayson sits hands clenched. I have a medical bag, naturally, with basic supplies, but nothing like that was used in my presence. Check my bag if you doubt me. Poirot nodded, filing away the offer. Mercy. And you, Mademoiselle Ward, you are a woman of many talents, sketching, observing. Have you knowledge of chemistry, perhaps from your travels? Evelyn Sett's lips curved in a faint smile. You step persistent, Monsieur Poirot. No, I step no chemist. My talents lie elsewhere. But I still wager the colonel sits. Enemies didn't need science to hate him. Perhaps, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. But the letter, the one demanding £5,000, and the sapphire, it speaks of Calcutta, of retribution. And your initials, mademoiselle, they appear in the Colonel Sepp's notebook, E.W., a recent entry. Care to explain? The room froze. All eyes on Evelyn. Her composure held, but her fingers tightened on her teacup. You said been busy, monsieur. I told you I knew Rupert years ago, a passing acquaintance. If he wrote my initials, it sets news to me. Perhaps he was reminiscing. Lady Margaret Sitt's voice was sharp. Evelyn, you never mentioned knowing Rupert before you came here. What are you hiding? Evelyn Steck's gaze didn't waver. Nothing, Margaret. Rupert and I met briefly in London, long ago. He wasn't stecked fond of me, and I returned the sentiment, that steck's all. Poirot's moustache quivered. All? None, mademoiselle. There is more. The photograph, L'Eljalji, Calcutta, 1898. The resemblance to you, it is striking. And now, E.W., in the Colonel's notes, the past, it binds you to this crime, I think. Before Evelyn could respond, Dr. Wells entered, his face flushed with excitement. Monsieur Poirot. ISEP completed the analysis. The water contains traces of chloral hydrate, a sedative, as you suspected. It septs, odorless, tasteless, perfect for slipping into a bath. Poirot's eyes lit up. Excellente. The chemistry. It confirms the method. The Colonel. He was drugged, then struck. The murderer. They needed him compliant, perhaps to stage the scene. Mercer Dr. Wells. As Wells left, Poirot turned to the household. This sedative, it is not common. It requires access, knowledge. Monsieur Grayson, your medical bag, may we inspect it now? Grayson nodded stiffly, retrieving a leather case from his room. Poirot examined its contents, bandages, a stethoscope, vials of common remedies, but no chloral hydrate. Curieux, Poirot murmured. The absence, it is as telling as the presence. He paced the room, his mind racing. The sedative, the blackmail letter, the sapphire's theft, the intruder's silver-threaded fabric, they were converging. He recalled the scratched soap in the bathroom, its uneven edges suggesting it had been hollowed to conceal a tablet. The soap, he said suddenly. It was tampered with. None. A clever hiding place for a drug. Clara, Steck's voice trembled. But who could do that? The servants prepare the bath, but they wouldn't Steck. Unless, Poirot interjected, someone instructed them, or slipped the tablet into the soap earlier. The butler, he filled the tub at 7:30. Who was in the bathroom before then? The household exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. Poirot's gaze settled on Nigel. Monsieur Nigel. You were near the staircase, in the billiard room, or so you claim. Did you see anyone near the bathroom? Nigel Sip's eyes flashed. I told you I was playing billiards. I didn't see anyone, and I didn't touch any damn soap. Poirot nodded, undeterred. The chemistry of motive. It is clear now. Greed for the sapphire, revenge for a past wrong, or fear of exposure. These are the elements. But the formula, it is not complete. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. The intruder last night. They sought the locked box in the library. The sapphire, perhaps, or something more. A secret worth killing for. As the household dispersed, Poirot lingered, his fingers brushing the scrap of silver-threaded fabric in his pocket. The chloral hydrate was a breakthrough, but it raised new questions. Who had access to such a drug, and why stage the murder in a bathtub? The little grey cells were alight, and the enigma was drawing ever closer to its heart. Chapter 11. The Gathering Storm. The afternoon sky over Thornfield Manor was heavy with clouds, their brooding shadows mirroring the tension that gripped the household. Hercule Poirot stood in the conservatory, surrounded by the lush greenery of orchids and ferns, his mind as sharp as the glass panes that enclosed the room. The clues, the chloral hydrate in the bathtub water, the blackmail letter demanding £5,000, and the Haverford sapphire, the photograph of L.W. from Calcutta, the silver-threaded fabric, and the locked box behind the library's hidden panel, formed a puzzle that was nearing completion. Yet the little grey cells warned Poirot that the storm was not yet over. Another act of violence loomed, and he must act swiftly to prevent it. The household had gathered in the drawing-room at Poirot's request, their faces a tableau of fear, suspicion, and defiance. Lady Margaret sat rigidly, her hands clasped around a handkerchief, her eyes darting nervously. Clara clung to Dr. Grayson, her pale face etched with exhaustion. Nigel paced, a cigarette burning between his fingers, his temper barely contained. Evelyn Ward, ever composed, watched the scene with a detached air, her dark eyes unreadable. Inspector Hargreaves and Dr. Wells, the forensic assistant, stood by the door, awaiting Poirot's next move. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice calm but resonant. "The murder of Colonel Rupert Haverford. It is a crime of cunning, woven with threads of greed, revenge, and betrayal. The sapphire's theft, the blackmail letter, the sedative in the water, these are not isolated acts but parts of a single design. And last night, an intruder sought the locked box in the library, a box that may hold the key to this enigma. I sense a storm gathering, a danger that threatens another life. We must act, or the tragedy, it will repeat." Lady Margaret Sitt's voice trembled. "Another life? Monsieur Poirot, what are you saying? Are we not safe in our own home?" Poirot Step's moustache twitched. "Madame's safety is an illusion when a murderer walks among you. The little grey cells, they tell me the killer is close, watching, waiting. But Hercule Poirot, he watches also." Nigel flung his cigarette into the fire. His face flushed. "This is madness. Yusip got us jumping at shadows, Poirot. First Uncle Rupert, then the sapphire. Now some phantom intruder. Why don't you just arrest someone and be done with it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Monsieur Nigel, impatience, it clouds the mind. The truth, it is like a fine wine. It requires time to breathe. But let us examine the facts. The chloral hydrate, it suggests a medical mind, or access to one. Monsieur le Dr. Grayson, your bag contained no such drug, yet you have the knowledge. None." Grayson Sitt's jaw tightened, his spectacles glinting. "I told you, I had no part in this. Chloral hydrate is common enough in medical circles, but I don't carry it. Anyone could have obtained it. A chemist, a hospital contact." Clara Sitt's voice was sharp. "Stop accusing Philip. Sitt's done nothing but help, while the rest of us bicker." Poirot raised a hand. "Mademoiselle Clara, loyalty. It is admirable, but it must not blind you. The alibis, they crumble. Monsieur Nigel, the billiard room was dark when the maid passed. Mademoiselle Ward, your sketches remain unseen, and your initials EW, too. They echo in the Colonel's notebook, linked to a past he feared. Madame Haverford, the sapphire's combination, known only to you and the Colonel, yet it is gone without a trace." Evelyn Ward Sitt's lips curved slightly. "You you're a bloodhound, Monsieur Poirot, but you're chasing your own tail. My past with Rupert was trivial. A brief meeting, nothing more. If you suspect me, prove it." Poirot's smile was serene. "Mademoiselle, the proof, it comes. But first, let us consider the intruder. The fabric I found, black with silver thread, suggests wealth, not a common thief. And the mud on the library sill, it was fresh from within the manor's grounds, not beyond. The intruder, they are one of you, or known to you." A sudden crash interrupted him, followed by a scream from the corridor. Poirot moved swiftly. the household trailing behind. In the foyer, the butler stood over a shattered vase, his face pale. Beside him, Clara swayed, clutching her arm, where a thin trickle of blood seeped through her sleeve. "Clara!" Dr. Grayson rushed to her side, examining the wound. "It sits shallow. Thank God. What happened?" Clara's voice trembled. "I was walking to the conservatory when someone pushed me. I fell against the vase. I didn't see who it was. It was so dark." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he scanned the foyer. A curtain fluttered near an open window, and a faint scuff mark marred the floor, leading toward the staircase. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "The storm. It breaks." "Monsieur le butler, who was in the corridor moments ago." The butler stammered. "No one, sir. I was checking the windows when I heard Miss Clara cry out." Poirot knelt, examining the scuff mark. It was fresh, the dirt matching the mud from the library sill. Interessant. The intruder they strike again, but clumsily. This was no accident, but a warning, or an attempt thwarted. Lady Margaret Sitt's voice was shrill. "Monsieur Poirot, you must protect us. First Rupert, now Clara. Who sits next?" Poirot stood, his expression resolute. "Madame Hercule Poirot protects by finding the truth. This attack, it is a sign of desperation. The murderer. They fear exposure. Mademoiselle Clara, tell me, what were you doing in the conservatory?" Clara hesitated, her eyes darting to Grayson. "I wanted to clear my head. I've been so frightened since Uncle Rupert's death." Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind was alert. "And you saw nothing? No face, no figure?" She shook her head. "It was too quick. Just a shadow, then the push." Poirot turned to the household, his voice firm. "The locked box in the library. It draws the killer like a moth to flame. I shall open it tonight, with Inspector Hargreaves present. The contents they will reveal the motive, greed, revenge, or fear. Until then, stay together, and trust no one." As Dr. Grayson bandaged Clara's arm, Poirot stepped aside, his fingers brushing the silver-threaded fabric in his pocket. The attack on Clara was no random act. It was a message meant to silence or distract. The initials, LW and EW, the sedative, the sapphire, the hidden box, they were converging toward a single truth. He glanced at Evelyn, whose calm facade flickered for a moment, and at Nigel, whose clenched fists betrayed his agitation. The storm was indeed gathering, but Poirot's little grey cells were ready to face its fury. He moved to the library, locking the door behind him, and approached the hidden panel. The locked box waited, its secrets calling. "Bientôt," he whispered. "The truth, it cannot hide forever." Chapter 12. The Final Interrogation. The drawing-room of Thornfield Manor was a crucible of tension as the evening shadows lengthened, the flickering firelight casting eerie patterns across the faces of the assembled household. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre, his small, fastidious figure radiating authority, his eyes gleaming with the certainty of a man who had glimpsed the truth. The clues, the chloral hydrate in the bathtub water, the blackmail letter demanding £5,000, and the Haverford sapphire, the photograph of L.W. from Calcutta, the silver-threaded fabric, the locked box, and the attack on Clara had converged in his mind, forming a tapestry of motive and method. Tonight he would unravel it, forcing the murderer to step into the light. Inspector Hargreaves stood by the door, his notebook open, while Dr. Wells, the forensic assistant, hovered nearby, ready to confirm Poirot's findings. Lady Margaret Haverford sat rigidly, her hands clutching a lace handkerchief. Clara, her arm bandaged from the previous night's attack, leaned against Dr. Grayson, whose spectacles glinted with unease. Nigel paced, his cigarette smoke curling like a spectre, and Evelyn Ward reclined in an armchair, her dark eyes watching Poirot with a mixture of curiosity and defiance. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice resonant yet precise, "the murder of Colonel Rupert Haverford. It is a crime of cunning, a puzzle designed to deceive. The locked room, the candlestick, the sedative, the stolen sapphire, these are not random acts but a symphony of intent. Tonight Hercule Poirot, with the aid of his little grey cells, will reveal the composer of this dark melody." Lady Margaret Sit's voice trembled. "Monsieur Poirot, you speak of truth, but surely you don't suspect one of us. An outsider, a thief from Rupert Stas' past, must be to blame." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Madame the outsider, he is a convenient fiction, but the evidence, it points inward. The chloral hydrate in the water, the candlestick from the library, the sapphire's case opened without force, these require knowledge of Thornfield Manor, its routines, its secrets. Let us begin with the locked room." He paced slowly, his cane tapping the floor. The bathroom door. It was locked from the inside, the key in place. The window, rusted and high, seemed impassable. Yet the colonel, he was drugged with chloral hydrate, struck with a candlestick, and left in warm water, fully clothed. Why such a stage? To suggest suicide perhaps, or to baffle, but the little grey cells, they see through. Dr. Grayson adjusted his spectacles, his voice tight. "The sedative confirms a medical mind, but I spate told you, my bag held no such drug. You checked it yourself." "Oui, Monsieur le Docteur," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "Your bag, it is clean, but knowledge, it is not confined to vials. You knew the colonel disapproved of your engagement to Mademoiselle Clara. He threatened to alter the will. None." Clara Sit's eyes widened. "Philip had no reason to harm Uncle Rupert. He Sit's a doctor, not a killer." Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, mademoiselle. Motive, it is but one piece. Let us consider Monsieur Nigel. Your alibi, it falters. The billiard room was dark when the maid passed. And your anger toward the colonel, it was no secret. He called you a wastrel, threatened your inheritance. The sapphire, it would secure your future. We." Nigel Sit's face reddened, his cigarette dropping to the floor. "You sit barking up the wrong tree, Poirot. I didn't touch that sapphire, and I was nowhere near the bathroom." "Calmez-vous," Poirot said, his tone serene. "The sapphire. It leads us to Mademoiselle Ward. Your initials, E.W., in the colonel's notebook, linked to a past in Calcutta. The photograph of L.W., it bears your likeness. The blackmail letter, demanding the sapphire, it speaks of retribution. You knew the colonel, more than you admit." Evelyn Stett's smile was cool, unyielding. "You weave a fine tale, Monsieur Poir, but I step no ghost from Calcutta. I met Rupert briefly, years ago. As I said, if he wrote my initials, it steps his obsession, not mine." Poirot Sit's eyes gleamed. "Obsession, mademoiselle. Or fear?" The letter demanded £5,000 and the sapphire, a gem you claimed no interest in. Yet the intruder last night, they sought the locked box in the library, a box I have now opened. He produced the small engraved box, its lock gleaming in the firelight. The household leaned forward, breathless. as Poirot opened it to reveal a single item, a folded document, yellowed with age. "This," he said, "is a confession, written by Colonel Rupert, dated 1898. It speaks of a scandal in Calcutta, a theft of jewels, a betrayal of a woman, L.W., who was wronged. The sapphire, it was hers by right, taken by force. The colonel, he lived in fear of her return." Lady Margaret gasped. "Rupert never spoke of this. Who is L.W.?" Poirot sits, gaze fixed on Evelyn. "Mademoiselle Ward, your mother, perhaps. Or a sister. The initials, the resemblance, they are no coincidence. You came to Thornfield, not as a guest, but as an avenger." Evelyn Sect's composure cracked, her eyes flashing. "You sector clever, Poirot, but you sector wrong. I sectum Evelyn Ward. Not some spectre from India, prove otherwise." Before Poirot could respond, Clara cried out, pointing to the window. "Look, there sits someone outside." All eyes turned to see a shadow flit across the garden, cloaked in black. Inspector Hargreaves bolted for the door, shouting for his men, but Poirot remained calm, his voice cutting through the chaos. "None, Inspector. The shadow, it is a distraction. The truth is here, in this room." He turned to the butler, who stood nervously by the wall. "Monsieur, you filled the bathtub at 7:30 with lavender soap, but the soap, it was tampered with, hollowed, to hold the chlor hydrate. Who gave you that soap?" The butler paled, stammering. "It was in the bathroom, sir. I assumed it was the usual." Poirot sits, eyes narrowed. "Assumed or instructed? You passed the library after dinner, saw the candlestick on the sideboard, and the scuff mark in the foyer. After Mademoiselle Clara Sit's attack, it matches the mud from the library sill. You, monsieur, are more than a servant." The butler's face crumpled, and he sank to his knees. "I didn't stutter mean to hurt Miss Clara. I was only to frighten her, to keep her from the conservatory." Lady Margaret Sit's voice was shrill. "Jenkins, what are you saying?" Poirot's tone was relentless. "He says he is a pawn, madam. But whose? The locked box, the sapphire, the murder. They are linked by a hand that knows this house. The silver-threaded fabric, it matches the shawl Mademoiselle Ward wore at dinner. The mud, it is from the conservatory path, where she claimed to sketch." Evelyn rose, her voice icy. "You sit overreached, Poirot. I sit for no murderer." "Perhaps," Poirot said, "but the truth, it is close. The little grey cells, they see the pattern. The Colonel Sit's confession, it names his betrayer, and tomorrow we shall open the final act." As the household dispersed, shaken, Poirot pocketed the confession, his mind alight. The butler's slip, Evelyn's defiance, the shadow outside, they were the storm's final gusts. The truth was within reach, and Hercule Poirot would seize it. Chapter 13. The Bathtub Secret. The drawing-room of Thornfield Manor was a stage set for revelation, its heavy drapes drawn to let in the pale light of a Devon morning, the air thick with anticipation. Hercule Poirot stood before the assembled household, his small, immaculate figure radiating an almost theatrical calm, his eyes gleaming with the triumph of the little grey cells. The clues, the chloral hydrate in the bathtub water, the blackmail letter demanding £5,000, and the Haverford sapphire, the photograph of L.W. from Calcutta, the silver-threaded fabric, the locked box with the Colonel's confession, and the attack on Clara had woven a tapestry of deception, and now Poirot was ready to unveil its final pattern. Inspector Hargreaves and Dr. Wells stood by the door, their faces taut, while the household, Lady Margaret, Clara, Dr. Grayson, Nigel, Evelyn Ward, and the butler Jenkins, waited in a silence broken only by the crackle of the fire. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice resonant with authority. The murder of Colonel Rupert Haverford. It is a crime of cunning, a puzzle designed to confound. The locked room, the candlestick, the sedative, the stolen sapphire, the blackmail letter, the intruder, they are threads in a web spun by a mind most clever. Today Hercule Poirot reveals the truth, and the bathtub, it yields its final secret. Lady Margaret clutched her handkerchief, her voice trembling. Monsieur Poirot, please, end this nightmare. Who killed Rupert? Poirot's moustache twitched. Madame, the nightmare. It ends with clarity. Let us reconstruct. The colonel was found in a locked bathroom, struck by a candlestick, drugged with chloral hydrate, hidden in tampered lavender soap. The room, it appeared impenetrable, door locked, window rusted. The sapphire, taken from a case known only to you, and the colonel. The letter, demanding £5,000, and the gem, spoke of retribution for a scandal in Calcutta, 1898. The photograph of L.W., the notebook entry for E.W., the silver-threaded fabric, the locked box, these are the pieces. But the key, it lies in the bathtub itself. Nigel snorted, his cigarette smouldering. The bathtub? It spews just a prop. Poirot, you stir chasing shadows again. None, Monsieur Nigel, Poirot said, his eyes piercing. The bathtub, it is the heart of the enigma. Why was the colonel fully clothed, in warm water, with no sign of struggle? Because he was not killed there. The scene, it was staged to deceive. Clara gasped, her bandaged arm trembling. Staged. But the locked door, how could anyone move him? Poirot raised a hand. Patience, mademoiselle. The door, it was locked from the inside, but the key, it was turned after the murder. The window, it bore a scratch, a droplet of water, suggesting it was opened briefly. The mud on the library sill, the silver-threaded fabric, they point to an intruder within this house. And the chloral hydrate, it ensured the colonel's compliance. Dr. Grayson adjusted his spectacles, his voice tight. You keep circling back to the sedative. Icebeth told you. I had no part in this. My medical bag was clean. Oui, Monsieur le Docteur, Poirot, said his tone deceptively mild. But your knowledge, it is not confined to your bag. You knew the colonel opposed your marriage to Mademoiselle Clara. He threatened to cut her from the will. None. A motive most compelling. Cleverset's eyes filled with tears. Philip would never. He sits kind, gentle. Gentle? Poirot interjected, his gaze softening. Perhaps, mademoiselle, but love, it can drive even the gentle to extremes. Yet let us consider another. Mademoiselle Ward, your initials, E.W., in the colonel's notebook, your resemblance to L.W., in the photograph, the blackmail letter. It spoke of Calcutta, a debt unpaid. You claimed a passing acquaintance, but the colonel feared you. Evelyn's lips curved in a faint smile, but her eyes were wary. You're persistent, Monsieur Poirot, but I'm no avenger from India. My mother was Laura Ward, Leleu wronged by Rupert in Calcutta. He stole the sapphire from her, ruined her. I came to reclaim it, yes, but murder, that's not my game. I doubt. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Vraiment, the silver-threaded fabric, it matches your shawl. The mud, from the conservatory path where you sketched. See, You sought the locked box, mademoiselle, to retrieve your mother Sist's confession or to ensure its silence. Before Evelyn could respond, Poirot turned to the butler, Jenkins, whose face was ashen. Monsieur Jenkins, you admitted to pushing Mademoiselle Clara, a clumsy attempt to frighten her. But why? Because she was near the conservatory, where the truth was hidden. You filled the bathtub, provided the tampered soap. You were not alone. Jenkins stammered, his hands trembling. I was following orders, sir. I didn't kill him. Poirot's voice was relentless. Whose orders, monsieur? The little grey cells, they see the truth. The colonel was drugged in his study, not the bathroom. The candlestick, taken from the library, struck him there. His body was moved to the bathtub, the door locked with a spare key, the scene staged to suggest a locked room mystery. The sapphire. It was never stolen. It was hidden to divert suspicion. Lady Margaret, Sit's voice was shrill. Hidden. By whom? Monsieur Poirot. Poirot turned, his gaze settling on Clara. Mademoiselle Clara, you were not in your room, as you claimed. The maid saw you near the study at 7:30, before the bath was filled. You who feared the colonel's threats to your inheritance, your future with Monsieur Grayson. You who had access to his medical bag, his knowledge of chloral hydrate. You who pushed the vase to stage your own attack, to deflect suspicion. Clorissette's face crumpled, tears streaming. No, I couldn't sit. I wouldn't sit. Dr. Grayson rose, his voice shaking. This is outrageous. Clorissette's innocent. Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone was firm. Monsieur Grayson, your loyalty, it is your undoing. The sapphire. It was found this morning, in your room, hidden in a book of medical texts. You helped Mademoiselle Clara. Non. You drugged the colonel, moved him to the bathtub, staged the scene. The confession in the locked box. It named Laura Ward, but it also revealed your complicity. You loved Clara, and you killed to protect her future. Grayson's shoulders sagged, his spectacles slipping down his nose. I couldn't let Rupert ruin her. He was going to disinherit her, leave her penniless. I slipped the chloral hydrate into his brandy, struck him in the study. Clara helped me move him, but she didn't know the full plan. The sapphire, I took it to make it look like theft. Clara sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I only wanted to scare him, to make him stop. I didn't mean for him to die. Poirot nodded, his voice gentle. Mademoiselle, the heart, it leads us astray. Monsieur Grayson, your love, it became a crime. The bathtub. It was your masterpiece, a locked room to baffle, a sedative to conceal. But the little grey cells, they see all. Inspector Hargreaves stepped forward, his face grim. Dr. Grayson, Miss Clara, you sit under arrest. As they were led away, Evelyn Ward met Poirot's gaze, her expression unreadable. You sit a dangerous man. Monsieur Poirot, my mother sits sapphire. I proclaim it legally now. Poirot inclined his head. Mademoiselle Justice, it is served in many ways. Lady Margaret collapsed into her chair, weeping, while Nigel stared into the fire silent. The Manor Sip's shadows seemed to lift. The enigma resolved. Poirot adjusted his tie, his work complete. The bathtub secret, he murmured. It was love, twisted into murder. Mon Dieu, what a tragedy!